conquers all that land, and he was named king. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was a very interesting fellow. He was hot-tempered, right? He was a tyrant. He was ambitious. Back in the States, we would say he was on an ego trip. Okay? Now, somebody like that, God couldn't use, could he? Okay, well, let's find out. Okay, so so remember, Nebuchadnezzar, then he conquered Judah. Remember, he conquered Judah. Now I'll read a couple of verses out of Judah. I mean, out of Daniel chapter 1, verses 1 and 2. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, who was the king of Judah at the time, remember, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, because by that time he had been anointed king, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God, all the gold, and all the treasure, and all the goblets and everything. The treasures were being carried off to Babylon. And what the Bible tells us is that Nebuchadnezzar was an instrument of God's judgment. You know, it's interesting. Now, Nebuchadnezzar didn't believe he was an instrument of God's judgment. He was just conquering, right? But, you know, God is Lord of all. And, you know, let me say this. There's a lot of people that I talk to, they say, I don't want to serve God. I'm not interested in serving God. That's an irrelevant issue. You know, everybody is going to serve God. Everybody serves God. Our choice is not whether or not we're going to serve God. Our choice is how we're going to serve God. Do we serve God in obedience, or do we serve God in disobedience? Even if we disobey God, we're going to serve him anyway. So you might as well be one of his people, you know what I'm saying, and get credit. Okay. All right. So Nebuchadnezzar, he's not thinking about God. He just wants to be rich. He wants to be powerful. And but the Bible tells us that he was an instrument of God's judgment. All right. Now Nebuchadnezzar would not have succeeded at all if Judah had repented of their unfaithfulness. Remember, Judah had become empty, and they had reduced God to a system they could manipulate. They thought they could manipulate. The Jews put their confidence in their treasure, and now the treasure is being taken off to Babylon to be put in the temple of pagan gods. So defame the vessels of the temple with their sins, then it is right for God to defame the vessels with his judgment. So Nebuchadnezzar is taking all this treasure and all this to the temple of his God. And the gods of Babylon were Asher, Bel, and Nebo. Now, put two and two together. Nebuchadnezzar was named after who? Nebo, one of the gods of Babylon. You see that? All right. So then what happens is that I'm going to, you know, in verses 3 through 5, oh, well, I'll just read this. Not only did the Babylonians plunder the temple, but they took the best people, the promising people. Okay? Verses 3 through 5. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his court officials, to bring some of the Israelites from the royal family and nobility, young men without physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians, The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table, and they were to be trained for 3 years, after which they would enter into the king's service. So here they're going to the University of Babylon on full scholarship. Okay, and that was the greatest. Tragedy of the kingdom of Judah. Now, there were 3 deportations of the people from Judah to Babylon. So this was the first deportation. There's 2 more coming. And so Judah, being the people of God at one time, they were to submit to the Babylonian domination on Babylonian terms. And these young leaders, as it were sold to the Babylonians for unstable peace. And so to the Babylonians, what the Jews were about, their agenda, what they were about, meant nothing. They didn't care. All they cared was the greatness of Babylon. So, how did Nebuchadnezzar regard these young, promising men of Judah? Well, they were showpieces for Nebuchadnezzar's conquest. They were hostages, as it were, to guarantee that Judah would go along with Babylon. They, in the States, we have this concept called, we call it brain drain. You know, they took the brightest, the best and the brightest, so that the Jews would be without leadership. Okay, that's what they were. And so these young men were the up and coming leaders of Judah, as it were. They were the nobility. They were the best, as you say, the best and the brightest. They were the high achievers of their generation. Now, Daniel himself was born around 620 BC. Now, you know, when you're in BC, you know, when the years go backwards, you know what I'm saying, like, you know, okay. So this is 620 BC when Daniel is born, and the conquest of Judah happened in 605 BC. So that